Margaret Henderson spent years suffering through 12 debilitating conditions, while the medical system drained her savings with expensive prescriptions that barely worked. The doctors kept prescribing more pills, each promising relief but delivering only side effects and financial ruin, leaving this dedicated former nurse trapped in a cycle of pain and poverty. But a letter from her late friend Dorothy revealed a simple remedy worth just $10 that the medical establishment had overlooked for decades. Just listen to how this shocking discovery not only transformed Margaret's life, but exposed a truth that would help thousands of seniors reclaim their health and freedom. The morning sun cast long shadows across Margaret Henderson's kitchen table in her modest Phoenix apartment. She sat motionless, staring at the white pill bottle in front of her, as if it were a puzzle she could no longer solve. Her hands, gnarled and swollen from years of arthritis, trembled as she reached for the cap. The simple twist motion that most people took for granted had become a daily battle. At 73 years old, Margaret had become a stranger in her own body. The woman who had once rushed through hospital corridors helping patients now struggled to open a bottle. Her body had turned into a cage, each movement restricted by pain, each breath weighted with exhaustion. The medicine cabinet in her tiny bathroom told the story of her decline. Orange prescription bottles lined every shelf, stacked 2 and 3 deep. Arthritis medications sat next to blood pressure pills. Insomnia tablets competed for space with digestive aids. Anti-inflammatories crowded against circulation boosters. Memory supplements, skin creams, respiratory inhalers, headache relievers, and energy medications created a pharmaceutical fortress that had failed to protect her from anything. Margaret finally managed to open the bottle, her fingers aching from the effort. She poured out the morning's dose, 6 different pills that clinked against the table. This was just the beginning. She would take more at lunch, more at dinner, and 2 before bed. 12 conditions required constant management, constant surrender to a routine that consumed her life without improving it. The financial burden sat heavy on her shoulders, heavier even than the physical pain. Each month, when her Social Security check arrived, Margaret performed the same disheartening calculation. The check never stretched far enough. Medical bills devoured the money before she could even consider other necessities. Co-pays had multiplied over the years as insurance companies changed their policies and pharmaceutical prices climbed. She remembered standing in the pharmacy 3 months ago, holding 2 prescriptions she desperately needed, knowing she could only afford 1. The pharmacist had looked at her with pity as Margaret chose the heart medication over the pain reliever. That night, she had eaten crackers for dinner, saving the grocery money for next month's medications. The choice between medicine and food had become routine. Sometimes she skipped doses to make bottles last longer. Sometimes she cut pills in half, stretching a 30-day supply into 60 days, knowing it reduced their effectiveness, but seeing no other option. The doctors never asked about her finances. They simply wrote prescriptions as if money were infinite. Her daughter Emily called every Sunday evening at exactly 7 o'clock. The calls followed a predictable pattern. Emily would ask how Margaret was feeling, and Margaret would say she was fine. Emily would talk about her children, her husband, her busy schedule. The conversation would last 15 minutes, then Emily would say she had to go and hang up. Margaret could hear the obligation in her daughter's voice, the dutiful checking of a box on a to-do list. Emily lived in Seattle, 3 states and 1,000 emotional miles away. She had her own family, her own life, her own problems. Understanding didn't ease the loneliness that settled in after each call, heavy and cold like winter fog. The window by her kitchen table had become Margaret's constant companion. She spent hours there, watching the neighborhood move through its daily rhythm. Young mothers pushed strollers down the sidewalk. Children raced home from school. The world outside continued its dance while Margaret sat still, separated from life by more than just glass. Her body protested every movement now. Standing up from the chair sent sharp pains through her knees. Walking to the bathroom required careful planning. Even breathing sometimes felt like work. The simplest tasks had become monumental challenges, each one reminding her of the vibrant woman she used to be. 6 months had passed since Dorothy died. Margaret's best friend, her companion through 40 years of coffee dates and shared complaints, had succumbed to heart failure on a Tuesday morning. Dorothy's death had created a void that medications couldn't fill. They had met as young nurses, full of idealism and energy. Together they had navigated careers, marriages, children, and eventually the slow decline of aging bodies. Now Margaret had no one who truly understood. Her days stretched empty and silent. The phone rarely rang, except for Emily's obligatory calls and automated reminders. The mailbox brought bills and pharmacy advertisements, never personal letters. Loneliness had become another condition to manage, another weight pressing down on her chest. The doctors kept prescribing. Every 3 months, Margaret sat in yet another sterile examination room, answering the same questions, receiving the same lectures. Her blood work showed concerning numbers. Each visit concluded with a new prescription or an increased dosage, another promise that this medication would finally bring relief. But relief never came. Instead, the pills brought side effects that required additional pills. The blood pressure medication caused dizziness. The pain medication upset her stomach. The sleep aids left her groggy all morning. Each solution created new problems, an endless cycle that treated symptoms while ignoring the exhaustion of simply trying to survive. Margaret had spent 40 years as a nurse, dedicated to healing and helping others. She had held patients' hands during their darkest moments. She had advocated for better care and stayed late countless nights to ensure everyone received proper attention. The medical profession had been her calling, her purpose, her identity. Now that same system felt like a betrayal. The doctors who treated her seemed to view her as a collection of symptoms rather than a person. They never asked about her life, her fears, her struggles to afford their prescriptions. Margaret had become just another elderly woman taking up appointment slots, her decades of service forgotten. The calendar on her refrigerator mocked her with its red circles marking appointments. Another doctor's visit loomed in 4 days. Margaret already knew how it would unfold. The doctor would review her chart while barely making eye contact, comment on her blood work, and suggest adjustments to her medication regimen. The suggestion of yet another medication terrified her most of all. Her budget couldn't absorb another monthly cost. Her body couldn't handle another side effect. But she would accept the prescription anyway, add it to the collection in her medicine cabinet, and figure out later which medication she would have to stop taking to afford the new one. Margaret swallowed her morning pills with lukewarm water from a chipped mug. They scraped down her throat, chemical promises that had long since lost their power to inspire hope. She looked around her small kitchen, at the worn linoleum and faded curtains, at the life she had built that now felt like a prison. Somewhere outside, the world continued its rush forward. Inside, Margaret Henderson sat alone with her 12 conditions and her dwindling options, waiting for something to change. The Tuesday morning started like any other. Margaret shuffled to her mailbox, expecting bills and advertisements. But among the envelopes, one stood out with unfamiliar handwriting and a California return address. Her arthritic fingers worked slowly to open it as she returned to her kitchen table. Inside were several pages in careful script. The letter introduced Sarah Chen, Dorothy's granddaughter who worked as a nutritionist in Los Angeles. Sarah explained that while sorting through her grandmother's belongings, she had discovered a sealed envelope with Margaret's name, containing specific instructions Dorothy had left behind. Margaret's hands shook as she read further. Dorothy's own words, transcribed from her notes, filled the pages. She apologized for not sharing this information sooner, explaining that she had wanted to document everything thoroughly before raising Margaret's hopes. Dorothy described how 6 months before her death, she had been in circumstances remarkably similar to Margaret's current situation. The pain had become unbearable. Medications had multiplied. Medical bills had forced her to consider selling her home. She had felt trapped and increasingly hopeless. Then Dorothy remembered something from her childhood. Her own grandmother, an immigrant with old-world wisdom, had used a simple remedy for various ailments. Desperate, Dorothy had called her elderly cousin in Taiwan, who walked her through the preparation method their grandmother had used. It involved fresh ginger root and high-quality olive oil. The preparation method was specific and precise. Take 2 tablespoons of fresh ginger root, grate it finely. Mix with 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. Let it infuse for exactly 24 hours in a sealed glass jar in the refrigerator. Strain through cheesecloth, store in a dark glass bottle, and take 1 teaspoon 3 times daily before meals. Dorothy documented her results with medical precision. Within the first week, she noticed subtle changes. Her sleep improved. The constant edge of pain began to dull. By the second week, her morning stiffness decreased noticeably. Her digestion stabilized. The third week brought dramatic changes. Her inflammation markers improved in blood work. Her blood pressure readings stabilized. By 3 months, Dorothy had worked with her physician to reduce 7 of her 12 medications. Her pain levels had dropped from an 8 to a 3. She described waking up one morning and realizing she had slept through the entire night, walking to her mailbox without planning rest stops, preparing meals without her hands cramping. Dorothy's notes detailed each condition. The arthritis pain decreased substantially. Blood pressure stabilized. Insomnia resolved. Digestive issues improved dramatically. Inflammation reduced visibly. Circulation improved. Memory sharpened. Skin conditions cleared. Respiratory function improved. Headaches became rare. Energy levels increased. Overall well-being transformed. Dorothy expressed regret that she hadn't shared this with Margaret sooner. She had planned to present her findings in person over coffee, but time had run out before she could fulfill that intention. Sarah's words resumed, explaining she had verified her grandmother's documentation. As a nutritionist, she had researched the scientific literature. Both ingredients had substantial evidence supporting their anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. She encouraged Margaret to discuss this with her physician and included her contact information for questions. Margaret set the letter down with trembling hands. Her first reaction was anger, sharp, bitter anger that burned in her chest. After 40 years in medicine, was she supposed to believe a simple kitchen remedy could accomplish what thousands of dollars in prescriptions couldn't? The suggestion felt like an insult. She had bankrupted herself following medical advice, trusting doctors. She had endured side effects, believing this was the only path. And now Sarah was suggesting Margaret had wasted everything on approaches that ginger and olive oil could outperform. Her nursing training rebelled. Where were the studies? The FDA approval? The peer-reviewed journals? This sounded like false hope preying on desperate people. The letter sat on her counter for 3 days. Margaret walked past it repeatedly, sometimes pausing to glare at it. She told herself she would throw it away, but something stopped her each time. The third night, Margaret lay awake at 3 a.m. This had become routine. Her prescription sleep medication had stopped working months ago. She stared at the ceiling, joints throbbing with pain that seemed worse in the dark hours. Her mind drifted to Dorothy's last visit, about 2 months before her death. Details emerged from memory with startling clarity. Dorothy had arrived with an energy Margaret hadn't seen in years. She had climbed the stairs without pausing for breath. She had moved around the kitchen with surprising ease, not the careful shuffling they had both adopted. Dorothy had tried to tell Margaret something that day. She remembered now her friend leaning forward with excitement, beginning to say she had discovered something important. But Margaret had interrupted, launching into a complaint about her latest medical bill. She had been so wrapped up in her own misery that she hadn't let Dorothy finish. Now, lying in darkness, with pain radiating through her body, Margaret felt regret join her anger. Dorothy had tried to share this while she was alive. She had wanted to help her friend. But Margaret had been too self-absorbed, too certain in her medical training, too trapped in her suffering to listen. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, the first since Dorothy's funeral. She wept for her friend, for the missed opportunity, for the knowledge that Dorothy had cared enough to leave these instructions, knowing Margaret might reject them. As dawn broke, Margaret made a decision. She would try Dorothy's remedy, not because she believed it would work, but because she owed it to her friend's memory. Dorothy had spent her final months documenting this specifically for Margaret. The least she could do was honor that effort. She rose from bed and walked to her kitchen. Sarah's letter still sat on the counter. Margaret picked it up with shaking hands and read through the instructions one more time. Tomorrow she would buy fresh ginger root and quality olive oil. She would prepare the mixture exactly as Dorothy described. Margaret didn't allow herself to hope. Hope felt too dangerous after so many disappointments. But she could manage this one small act of faith, this gesture of respect for 40 years of friendship. Margaret stood in her kitchen the next morning, hands trembling as she picked up the grater. The ginger root sat on her cutting board, ordinary yet somehow promising. She felt foolish, a woman with 40 years of medical training about to trust a folk remedy. She began to grate. The moment the grater broke through the skin, a sharp, clean scent burst into the air, bright and almost medicinal. Margaret grated 2 tablespoons as instructed, then measured 4 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil. She had splurged on the good kind, following Dorothy's specific notes about quality. Mixing them carefully, she watched the white fibrous bits suspend throughout the golden liquid. She sealed the jar and placed it in her refrigerator. The next 24 hours crawled by. She found herself checking the jar repeatedly, watching as it transformed. When the timer rang, Margaret strained the mixture through cheesecloth. The resulting liquid looked simple, just pale yellow oil, but the aroma was powerful and warming. Taking that first teaspoon required courage. She swallowed it, feeling it burn slightly going down, warmth spreading from her throat into her chest. She waited for something to happen. Nothing dramatic came, just lingering warmth and an odd taste. Disappointment settled over her. Of course it wouldn't work, but she had made a promise. She would take it 3 times daily, completing this experiment with discipline. The first week passed with frustrating sameness. Part of her wanted to quit, but a stubborn part insisted she continue at least a month. Then on the 8th morning, Margaret woke confused. Her clock read 6:47 a.m. She had slept over 8 hours straight without waking once. Her body felt rested in a way it hadn't in months. The usual morning stiffness was less oppressive. She sat up slowly, and the sharp pains came but muted. Margaret refused to believe this meant anything. It was one night. She continued her routine. 2 weeks in, Margaret reached for a pasta sauce jar. Her fingers twisted the lid without thinking. It gave way smoothly. She stared at the open jar, confused. She grabbed another jar, pickles she hadn't opened in months. The lid resisted, but gave. Margaret stood holding it, tears streaming down her face. This wasn't imagination. Her hands worked better, measurably better. By the 3rd week, Emily called. Mid-conversation, she stopped. "Mom, you sound different. Your voice sounds stronger, less tired." Margaret said carefully, "I've been trying something new." She didn't elaborate, afraid to jinx it. The doctor's appointment arrived. The nurse's eyebrows rose, checking her blood pressure. She checked again, then made a note without comment. Dr. Patterson entered with her chart. She watched confusion cross his face as he reviewed her blood work. "Mrs. Henderson, your blood work is quite different. Your inflammation markers dropped significantly. Your blood pressure is 128/78, down from 145/92. Your liver enzymes are returning to normal." He looked at her directly. "What have you changed?" Margaret hesitated. "I've been taking ginger and olive oil mixed together, a teaspoon 3 times daily before meals." Dr. Patterson's face showed surprise, skepticism, then thoughtful consideration. He pulled up medical articles. Ginger contains gingerols and shogaols, known anti-inflammatory agents. The research shows measurable effects on inflammation markers. He showed another article. Olive oil contains powerful antioxidants. The fat helps with absorption of ginger's compounds. This could theoretically address multiple issues simultaneously. He leaned back. "I'd like to monitor your progress. If improvements continue, we should reduce some medications." Margaret left in a daze. Sitting in her car, emotions broke free. Vindication flooded through her. Dr. Patterson had confirmed it with blood work and science. But close behind came anger, hot and fierce. This simple remedy, costing $10 weekly, had accomplished what 12 expensive prescriptions hadn't. For years she had suffered and bankrupted herself. Why hadn't any doctor mentioned this? She thought of Dorothy, keeping this to herself until the end. Then remembered Dorothy's last visit, trying to tell her something important. But Margaret had been too wrapped up in complaints to listen. The anger transformed into purpose. This wasn't just about her. Dorothy had wanted this shared. Her friend's final gift was the mission to spread this knowledge. As Margaret began grating fresh ginger, the sharp scent filling her kitchen, she felt something she hadn't in years. Purpose. The transformation unfolded slowly over the next 3 months. Margaret's 12 conditions didn't vanish, but they became manageable instead of overwhelming. The arthritis pain decreased by 70%. She tracked this carefully in her journal. On the pain scale, she had consistently rated discomfort between 7 and 9. Now most mornings registered as a 3. Her insomnia resolved completely within 6 weeks. She had grown so accustomed to fractured sleep that sleeping through the night felt disorienting at first. Her body rediscovered the ability to rest properly, cycling through sleep stages without constant interruptions. The digestive issues that had turned every meal into anxious calculation improved dramatically. The constant discomfort faded. Meals became pleasurable rather than problematic. Her blood pressure stabilized without medication. Within 8 weeks, her readings consistently measured in the healthy range. Dr. Patterson reduced one medication, then eliminated it entirely. 3 weeks later, he discontinued the second one. Her blood pressure remained stable at 125/80. The inflammation in her joints reduced so substantially that Margaret could take walks again. For 2 years, she had been confined to her apartment. Now she could walk around her neighborhood block. By the end of 3 months, she was walking 30 minutes daily. Her circulation improved in ways that surprised her. Her perpetually cold hands and feet felt warm again. Color returned to her pale skin. People commented that she looked well. Her memory sharpened in subtle but meaningful ways. The concerning forgetfulness that had frightened her decreased. She could follow conversations more easily and remember details that would have previously escaped her. Her chronic headaches became rare occurrences. Weeks passed between them. When they did occur, they were milder and sometimes resolved without medication. Her energy returned gradually. For years, exhaustion had been constant. Now she could complete multiple tasks without collapsing. The oppressive weight lifted enough that she could breathe freely. But the most profound transformation was the shift in Margaret's spirit. One morning she woke up and realized she felt curious about the day ahead. That curiosity pulled her back into the world. Margaret returned to the senior center she had abandoned 18 months ago. Several people looked up as she entered. "Margaret, is that you?" called Helen Rodriguez. "You look completely different. What happened?" Margaret told her about Dorothy, Sarah's letter, the ginger and olive oil mixture. Helen's eyes showed desperate hope. "Does it really work?" "It worked for me," Margaret said simply. "I have the recipe." Word spread quickly. By the end of that first visit, 5 people had asked for the recipe. Margaret created printed cards with careful instructions, measurements, preparation details, and a note encouraging people to discuss it with their doctors. The following week, 20 cards disappeared within minutes. People clustered around Margaret, asking questions, sharing health struggles, expressing cautious optimism. Over the following weeks, Margaret watched transformations unfold. Some were skeptical at first, just as she had been. Others embraced it immediately, driven by desperation. Results varied. Some experienced dramatic improvements. Others noticed modest changes. A few reported no difference. Margaret documented everything. Word spread beyond the senior center. Margaret received calls from people who had heard about the remedy. She answered patiently, sharing Dorothy's story and her own experience. She reached out to Sarah Chen by email, thanking her for honoring Dorothy's wishes. Sarah's response revealed that Dorothy had spent her final 6 months researching the remedy extensively. She had documented how it helped with joint pain, reduced inflammation, improved digestion, lowered blood pressure, enhanced circulation, boosted the immune system, eased respiratory issues, improved skin conditions, reduced headaches, increased energy, promoted better sleep, and supported cognitive function. Dorothy had wanted to publish these findings but died before she could. Sarah asked if Margaret might continue Dorothy's work. Margaret created a simple blog titled Dorothy's Gift. She posted about her experience, the recipe, detailed instructions, and updates from others. Messages arrived from across the country. The blog attracted thousands of readers. Margaret's medical bills dropped to less than a quarter of what they had been. She reduced 8 of her 12 medications under Dr. Patterson's supervision. The financial relief transformed her daily life as much as the physical improvements. 3 months in, Emily came for a visit. Margaret watched her daughter's face shift from dutiful greeting to genuine shock. "Mom, you look completely different. You're standing up straight. You're moving normally." Margaret led Emily to the refrigerator and pulled out the dark glass bottle. "This," she said simply. She told Emily everything. Her daughter's expression shifted from skepticism to wonder to something that looked like grief. "You were suffering so much, and this simple thing helped when nothing else did?" "Yes," Margaret said. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "I should have visited more." Margaret took her daughter's hand, something she couldn't have done 3 months ago without pain. "You had your own life, but I'm better now. We have time to rebuild." Standing in her kitchen after Emily left, preparing a fresh batch, Margaret thought about Dorothy. Her friend had known the medical system had failed them both, but instead of accepting that failure, she had searched for alternatives. Dorothy's legacy wasn't just a recipe, but a reminder that sometimes the simplest solutions were the most powerful, and that true friendship meant sharing hope even beyond death. Margaret realized her 40 years in nursing hadn't been wasted. Now, instead of administering expensive medications, she was sharing affordable wisdom. She was still healing people, just in a different way. The mixture in her refrigerator represented more than relief from 12 ailments. It represented freedom from the financial burden of endless prescriptions, freedom from helplessness, and most importantly, freedom from the belief that suffering was inevitable in old age.